Welcome to this first webinar of the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition. My name is François Paquet. I'm Impact Director at the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition. Thank you for joining our webinar titled CHANGEMAKERS, Industry Unlocking the Potential of Renewable Hydrogen. So today is about the doers, those who are making the renewable hydrogen a reality every single day. A few words about the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition, maybe for those of you who do not know us. We promote the key role of renewable hydrogen in meeting the EU long-term decarbonisation goals. We were launched in November last year, and we have seen the number of our supporters growing over the past months, which also reflects the vivid interest in renewable hydrogen these days. So very important to understand, our coalition was created to help deliver the ambition of the European Commission hydrogen strategy and to make Europe the global leader in renewable hydrogen solutions. Europe is a front runner in clean technologies, and we have a world-leading renewable industry here in Europe, with some global champions here today with us. But Europe is not alone in the world, and others are catching up fast. Industrial leadership in renewable hydrogen, in electrolyzers technologies is contested. So our speakers today will tell us what is needed to keep Europe's competitive edge in renewable hydrogen, what is needed to replicate the success of existing projects, and why building a renewable-based hydrogen economy can be an industrial success for Europe. Now, this webinar will be structured as follows. We will have an introductory remark by the European Commission, then leading industry players will present some of their projects to make renewable hydrogen a reality. We will then have a panel debate where our experts will discuss how we can scale up and unlock the potential of renewable hydrogen in key sectors of industry. This will be followed by a Q&A, and then the panel will be concluded with a closing remark from my side. I now have the great pleasure of welcoming our distinguished experts who will be with us today. From the European Commission side, I'm very happy to welcome Enel and Ørsted, Deputy Head of Units from Energy Intensive Industries and Raw Materials Units in DG GROW. I believe you will be joined for the panel debate by Jiri Yilkanen, Policy Officer in your team as well. On the industry side, we have three distinguished experts. First, Sanni Kunas, Senior Manager Governmental Relations at Wacker Chemie. Antonelli Simone Diodato, you're the second on the list. You're Head of Regulatory Affairs at Enel for the Europe area. And finally, Joël Mechelaars, you lead Regulatory Affairs and Stakeholder Manager at Ørsted. Very much welcome to all of you. Happy to have you with us today. And I will have the pleasure to moderate your exchange at this event. But before we listen to the European Commission's introductory remark, I'd like to make a few organizational points. Everyone will be muted during this webinar. Speakers will have to unmute their microphones to speak. We would like to enjoy a lively debate, so we encourage everyone in the audience to put forward your questions. To that end, you have a questions box on the right-hand side of your screen where you can put your questions forward. This webinar finally will be recorded and be made available to everyone afterwards. So now, without any further ado, Mr. Ørsted, the floor is yours for, say, 5 to 7 minutes introduction on the European Commission's plan to mainstream renewable hydrogen in Europe, and perhaps this plan to make Europe the global leader in this emerging new industry. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wacker. Good morning, welcome everyone. Thank you for having me invited along to this webinar this morning. My name is Enel and Ørsted. I'm the Deputy Head of Unit in DG Grow of the Unit for Energy Intensive Industries and Raw Materials, and I'm the operational lead of the DG Grow Hydrogen team since a few weeks. So I'm new in this role, learning a lot, and I'm certainly here today also to learn from you and from your statements and experiences that I hope you will be sharing with us. Hydrogen technologies have been supported and developed, of course, over many years, and we are now at the stage where the technology is ready for large-scale deployment. So the focus is no longer on research alone, but on scaling up the deployment. Of course, in hard to debate industry sectors, hydrogen clearly has a role to play to reach the 2050 climate neutrality objectives of the EU, and the objective of the EU hydrogen strategy, that was already mentioned, adopted by the Commission in July last year, is clearly to support the scale up of the deployment of clean hydrogen in Europe to this end. You probably all know that the strategy sets the strategic objective to install 6 GW of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers and produce up to 1 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2024, and for 2030, 40 GW renewable hydrogen electrolyzers and 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen. And key for this will be to develop an investment agenda with a concrete pipeline of viable investment projects. This is the objective of the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, the EU Innovation Fund, and IPCI, the hydrogen IPCIs. So we need to develop this investment agenda, and at the same time ensure, of course, a supportive policy and regulatory framework, good enabling conditions that will be key for all commercial decisions on investment projects. So you know that in the context of Fit for 55, the Commission is working on this. This work is very much ongoing with internal discussions and preparations at full speed. So it's going to be very difficult for me to comment in a public meeting like this one here today on these internal Commission discussions, but I'm looking forward to hear your views on that. Just a couple of words on the Clean Hydrogen Alliance. It is one of the instruments set up in the EU industrial strategy of last year to push the scaling up of the deployment of hydrogen. So the key aim is to build and to identify a pipeline of viable investment projects along the EU hydrogen value chain. There's now more than 1,200 members of the alliance, from industry, research organizations, public authorities, civil society, and the work is grouped around different roundtables on hydrogen production, hydrogen transmission distribution, applications in industry, and so on. What is currently ongoing is a collection of projects from stakeholders for this building of pipeline of projects. The projects that we will receive will then be screened and assessed by us. There's going to be a presentation at the Hydrogen Forum for all Alliance members on 17-18 June. And then we intend to bring together individual projects collected into larger, more integrated along the value chain projects for the presentation of a pipeline of investment projects before the end of the year. Public support is, of course, still key for the deployment of hydrogen. It can facilitate and initiate a large-scale private investment and really kickstart the creation of a clean hydrogen market. The EU is contributing, among others, with its innovation fund, sourced with 1 billion euros, and a lot of hydrogen projects have been put forward. The selection process is ongoing. And this against the background that the emerging hydrogen sector can, as I said at the outset already, contribute to EU industrial competitiveness, provide high-skilled jobs, which is why we see hydrogen and renewables as a flagship for the economic recovery post-COVID. So certainly there's a lot of encouragement from the side of the Commission also to member states to do the necessary investments and reforms. Of course, member states are encouraged to cooperate and create this integrated EU value chain. And the IPCEI tool, IPCEI, important project of common European interest, is about just that. It is a framework under which the Commission can clear a national state aid, provided it meets certain conditions, one of which is that the projects are integrated across member states. IPCEIs often trigger a lot of private investments, of course, as well. That is the idea. They were successfully employed in the case of batteries based on the new industrial strategy, and the intention is to do the same on hydrogen now, again with a view to scale up the deployment of clean hydrogen. With this, I pass the floor back to, I believe, Mr. Paquet, and to the other panelists. Looking forward to listen to different positions during this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henning, for that interesting introduction. And I'll just pick up on one thing, which is the reference to the European Battery Alliance, which really is an example that shows that in Europe, when we want to focus and give a priority to something, there is a result out of it. And today we have this entire value chain set up, which works, and that's an example that indeed is reassuring to hear from your side. Will be taken into account for massively streamlining support towards the development of a renewable-based hydrogen economy. Without further ado, I think I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker today from industry, Sunny. That's up to you now to present what Wacker has been doing to make renewable hydrogen a reality in your sector.
Thank you, Francois, and also thank you, Henning, for the introductory remarks. And also thank you for giving me the 5 minutes to present our renewable hydrogen project at Wacker. Wacker is indeed a specialty chemicals company from Germany, and I'm going to try and use these minutes wisely to share with you some of the insights we have from this experience now with the project, and also, of course, why we need renewable hydrogen to defossilize our production. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Because I want to begin a little bit with the basics. Because as a chemical company, we need hydrogen not as an energy source, but primarily as a feedstock. And this feedstock is then used for other materials. So one example is, for example, methanol, which is based on hydrogen. And at Wacker, we use this methanol to then produce silicones, for example. So just like the rest of the economy, we are also heading towards climate neutrality in 2050. So if we want to cut emissions, for example, from our silicones production, we really need to replace this fossil methanol with a renewable alternative. And in this particular case, it really means going all the way back to defossilizing the hydrogen molecule. And this is exactly what our project Rhine-Bavaria aims to achieve. It stands for renewable hydrogen and methanol, And what we want to do is to build up a production of renewable methanol that is based on renewable hydrogen and recycled CO2 to defossilize our production. Now, on this slide, I would ask you to maybe first follow the dark green arrows on the flowchart so you can see how we intend to plan and set up this project in the short term. So in a first step, we want to build a 20 megawatt water electrolyzer together with our project partner, Linde. And this will, of course, be powered with renewable electricity to generate fully renewable hydrogen. The second step of the project is then to build a methanol plant. And with this methanol plant, we then mix the renewable hydrogen together with CO2 emissions that we have captured from our own installation at our industrial site in Burghausen. And when you mix these two things together, basically you get renewable methanol. So by producing the methanol this way, we can actually lower the CO2 footprint by 80%. So this will significantly contribute to defossilizing a range of materials. As I mentioned before, for Wacker, it's mainly about our silicones, but it can also, for example, go into different fuels. But our vision doesn't stop there. Basically, what we want to do and aim for in the long term is really to scale up this hydrogen production and become the first green hydrogen hub in southern Bavaria, because then we can also use the potential in the neighboring industries such as cement or fuel to include them into this industrial decarbonization. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Now, in a way, you might be wondering already, like, well, why have we not come up with this idea sooner? We have the infrastructure, we have the industrial site, we have the demand, and we even have free CO2 as a feedstock. And now the short version of this answer is that it's not a technological challenge, it's really an economic one. And as many of you know, in the end, it's all about the cost. And in our case, it's in particular the operational costs resulting from electricity. And this is really turning out to be the hardest nut to crack for this business model. Because you have to remember, Wacker is a chemical company, so we do not have a wind park in our backyard. We have to go to the market to purchase the renewable electricity for our electrolyzer. And unfortunately, prices there don't always reflect the actual very cheap generation costs of renewables. So if we look at the graph depicting our OPEX costs, and we take a look at the first two bars, we can conclude three things. First of all, electricity has the absolute main share when it comes to the OPEX costs. Second of all, with the current prices, our business model will not be economically viable. And in order to get to do this, we really need support to bridge the OPEX gap. But in fact, as you can see in the second bar, even if we do get funding from the EU Innovation Fund, because in fact we are one of those projects that Henning already mentioned, we have applied and we're already in the second application round, so it's looking good. But even if we would get the funding, we would only reach a break-even point with the business model at this moment. So in fact, what this means for the long term is that only by having electricity prices that are competitive and around 4 cents per kilowatt hour can we actually guarantee that this business model stays competitive and can start phasing out the fossil alternatives in our production. And this is reflected in the third bar. So to conclude, we see a huge potential for renewable hydrogen. It's inevitable for us to defossilize. But unfortunately, the market realities today is that renewable hydrogen is not yet cost competitive. And the business case is challenging. But at the same time, we also know that we need to invest today to have the economies of scale by 2030 that really makes this business model a winning thing. So this is really why we need the public support to bridge this cost gap and help us take the investments from today into 2030. And again, I want to underline that really targeting the high electricity cost for industrial players is key to unlocking this potential. So my last slide, if you go one further, is just a very straightforward conclusion for the Fit for 55 package from our point of view. I mean, renewable energy, I have not yet seen one scenario where policymakers would be concerned that we will have too much renewable energy. So, let's just go as far as we can, as quick as we can, and make sure that this electricity is cheap and cost competitive for electrolyzers. And we can make this happen, for example, via different measures such as contracts for difference, but really channel this OPEX support into these projects. And finally, we're speaking often about the nitty-gritties around the regulatory framework. I think my only recommendation there is to let's not kill off the diversity of renewable projects, renewable hydrogen projects that we have going on today, because we will need this diversity to really decarbonize the entire industry, the entire economy, and only then also, I think, will this technology really show its true potential. So that would be from my part. Thank you very much, and looking forward to digging deeper during the discussion.
Thank you very much for that powerful intervention. Before we move to the next speaker, thank you for putting forward your questions in the questions box that you have on the right side of your screen. Some are already coming in, which we will then use in the panel debate. Simone, you're the next on the list. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francois. Good morning to the audience. Good morning to Mr. Ehrenstein, Sani, Joel. I'm happy to be here and thank you for having invited me. So as Enel, we are developing projects for the production of renewable hydrogen in many parts of the world where we are present. Currently, we are focusing in Chile, in the United States. In Europe, we're focusing in Spain and Italy. We think that in the context of the energy transition, hydrogen will have to make a valuable contribution to the decarbonization, renewable hydrogen, of course, and this will concern mainly energy-intensive industries such as chemicals, aviation, maritime, non-electrified rail transport. We have, of course, to make sure that this hydrogen is produced sustainably. So that's why in our view, all our projects have three main points in common. They first of all concern renewable hydrogen. Second, the users of this renewable hydrogen are operating in those so-called hard-to-abate sectors where fossil fuels cannot be replaced by direct electrification. And third, hydrogen is produced close to the point of consumption, so in the so-called hydrogen valley configuration. If we go to the first slide of the presentation, thank you very much. Here we have two examples of projects located in Spain. In general, we're working with power-to-heat and power-to-chemicals applications. In the case of Spain, we're working mainly on projects related to power-to-heat. The example on the left is the Aspontes site. It's a site where we are operating a coal plant of 1,500 megawatts, 1.5 gigawatt of capacity. This coal plant is being phased out in this very moment. And we're planning to develop 100 megawatt project, renewable hydrogen project to supply renewable hydrogen to a portfolio of off-takers in the vicinity. This project will reuse part of the coal power plant facilities and will take advantage of a large 600 megawatt wind farm that Enel is developing in this area. Another example is for Spain is the Orange Bat project. Here we're using we plan to use renewable hydrogen to reduce high emissions of a specific sector, the ceramics industry in the Valencia region. The industrial district of Castellón in the Valencia region is one of the most important ceramics producing areas in Europe. And they are currently they're currently relying on natural gas. We want to replace it at least partially with hydrogen. And there is hydrogen produced through electricity coming from wind and solar. Of course, the role of Enel here, since this is a consortium, is to provide sustainable electricity and provide investment in the electrolyzer. An innovative, pioneering 100 megawatt device. It's innovative because it's innovative from the point of view of the technology. These are big electrolyzers, considering the current stage of development of the technology. We want to innovate in order to understand how to use it, to make it tailored to our customers' need, in order to make sure that we can provide renewable hydrogen 24/7. We want to innovate in order to make sure that these electrolyzers can contribute to a positive, to a winning business model by reducing, on the one hand, the costs, and on the other hand, we think that we need to improve the revenues. Improve the revenues by having the possibility to use the electrolyzer to provide this renewable hydrogen to our customers, but also identify other additional revenue streams that can come from sector integration with the power sector. For example, using the electrolyzer to provide ancillary services in the power market, to provide maybe services in order to avoid curtailment of renewables. Those services which today maybe we can think for storage, we are planning to develop them also for electrolyzers and for this kind of infrastructure architectures. The great thing in Spain in this case is that we have a consortium. So we are part of a big consortium that is that involves the entire value chain. So a Spanish industrial group, a Swiss company, Smart Energy, involved in the development of the hydrogen technology. We have regional government, trade associations, small, medium-sized ceramics businesses involved. So the idea is to have everybody on board in order to provide a full solution for decarbonization of this sector. Going to the second slide, please. Here I will run quickly through other projects we are developing in Italy. In this case, we are focusing on power to chemicals. These are 3 projects, 2 of which with ENI and 1 with Saras. Both are operating refineries. And in one of the 2 projects with ENI, we are co-locating an electrolysis plant with the renewable plant and transporting hydrogen to the refinery. In this case, the electrolyzer only works when the photovoltaic plant, which is the supplier of electricity, is producing. The idea is, of course, to the basic idea of this business model is to make sure that we can, through direct connection of this photovoltaic plant with the electrolyzer, we don't have to go through the grid. We can reduce the costs connected to the grid usage, to the taxes and levies connected to the electricity bills, and this way improve the business model. In the Saras case, for example, is different. In this case, electrolyzer is located in the refinery, but it is supplied through the grid. Is the renewable plants, which have a PPA, which have a relationship with the electrolyzer, are not located near the electrolyzer. So we will have to go through the grid. And obviously, in these cases, it is fundamental for us to understand if we will be able to how we will be able to certify the hydrogen produced by the electrolyzer as renewable hydrogen. And here, of course, the definition that the delegated act will give for renewable hydrogen is basic element in order to understand if the project works. What is very, very important here is that if we're able, in this configuration, in this architecture, is that if we're able to supply electricity to the electrolyzer through the grid using maybe not only one plant, but a number of plants, we will be able to provide combining several renewable production profiles. We will be able to make the electrolyzer work much more, and this will, of course, have a very positive impact on the investment costs. So now Having said this, let's come to the last slide. What we think we need with the policies we think we need in order to ensure that renewable hydrogen deployment is successful. First of all, we think that we need clear policy measures, because we need these are needed in order to ensure that we can achieve, on the one hand, 2030, 2050 targets, decarbonization targets for Europe. But at the same time, these are needed in order to ensure that renewable hydrogen will contribute to the growth of the European economy, will be an industrial success story, for example, but will be also integrated as much as possible in the power system, in the European electricity and energy market. So for this, we think that first of all, electrification is the key driver to decarbonize economy, such heating, cooling, transport, and industry sectors. In addition to that, we will need to produce renewable hydrogen. We will need electricity to produce renewable hydrogen. In order to complement what electrification cannot achieve. We think as well that blending renewable hydrogen in the gas network runs counter this priority we need to give to hydrogen in sectors that would benefit the most from renewable hydrogen usage. And the blending would lead to a suboptimal use of scarce renewable hydrogen today. And by the way, we have, and we've heard also from Sani before, that there is a demand for hydrogen today. There is a usage of hydrogen already in the market. So we have enough demand which can be supplied with hydrogen, with renewable hydrogen in the short term. In the medium term, we will have demand which relies on different fossil fuels turning to hydrogen. And this will provide enough, let's say, off-takers without the need of blending valuable resources inside the gas network. Last comment on the policy efforts, which have to focus on renewable hydrogen in order to make it cost competitive. This is not the case today because of high OPEX and CAPEX. Operating costs of the electrolyzers and the capital expenditure that we have investing in this technology. This is the real bottleneck. For example, when it comes to electricity cost, which makes out a big part of the cost of an electrolyzer, we think that, for example, what we are experiencing in some of the projects is that if we are able to harmonize the cost of electricity compared to other fossil fuels today, and if we are able to reduce part of the taxes and levies which are on the cost of electricity, we will be able to create already a strong improvement to the business model of hydrogen projects. So, thank you very much. These are my final suggestion for policy. I will leave the floor back to Francois.
Thank you very much, Simone, for those powerful messages. I would like to give the floor now to our next speaker, Joël. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, many thanks, Francois, and thank you again for having us on the panel today. And also thanks to everyone who's listening in today. As some of you might know, Ørsted was the first company to install offshore wind turbines back in 1991. Today, we're the global market leader with operational offshore wind farms and a growing pipeline in the US, Europe, and Asia. But at Ørsted, we want to create a world that runs entirely on green energy. It's not just electricity we're focusing on. And therefore, our next frontier is offshore wind linked to electrolyzers to decarbonize transport and industry. We're developing various of such projects in Europe, but today I want to highlight in particular our latest initiative, which is Sea to Land. Next slide, please. Sea to Land is a project that aims to realize a 2 gigawatt offshore wind farm, a new 2 gigawatt offshore wind farm linked to a 1 gigawatt electrolyzer, and we want to do this by 2030. We're doing this in one of the largest demand centers of fossil hydrogen in Europe, the Dutch-Flemish North Sea port cluster. This is a place where you find all the pieces of the puzzle. It's a place with an existing hydrogen demand, so no need to switch technologies. It's a matter of replacing fossil hydrogen with renewable hydrogen to create CO2 emissions reductions. It's a place where already now landing points have been identified for new offshore wind export cables. And it's a place with an existing hydrogen network that you can build out and to cross with that into Belgium. The project is unique in our view as it brings together demand and supply in two ways. First of all, supply of offshore wind electricity to fulfill the demand of the electrolyzer. This is in particularly important in a zero subsidy offshore wind market like the Netherlands. We have a merchant project, an offshore wind farm, $1 billion investment operational for 30 to 35 years with no visibility on where you're going to bring your power. But with an integrated project like this, you're creating your own stable revenue stream, which normally you would get through a CFD, for example. The second way we're bringing together demand and supply is to supply renewable hydrogen to fulfill the demand from industrial off-takers like Dow Chemical, Yara, ArcelorMittal in Belgium. And with that, we're able to make those production processes, production of steel, production of fertilizer, production of chemical products, to make that more sustainable. This project is also unique because in this vision, we want to create a regional infrastructure and make that an infrastructure that is cross-border. Next slide, please. As you can see on this map, the blue lines showing you a pipeline that we want to build from all the way from Vlissingen in the north to Ghent in Belgium. It's crucial for a number of reasons. First of all, with expanding the existing network, we're able to connect all those off-takers which are going to consume hydrogen for a more green industrial production. But it's also crucial for the upscaling period because sea to land in the first phase will only meet 20% of the current hydrogen consumption. So the existing SMRs that you have in this region and through this regional network can help to provide some flexibility because these companies need a certain baseload of hydrogen supply. And last but not least, the cross-border element is very important. As you can see, the infrastructure would run into Belgium, into Ghent. And as we all know, Belgium is a country that will need huge imports of either green electrons or renewable hydrogen to reduce CO2. Its offshore wind potential is limited due to its relatively small part of the North Sea. And also on land, they have limitations to the build out of onshore renewables. So therefore, this regional cross-border infrastructure can help to bring renewable hydrogen produced onshore in the Netherlands with green electrons from the Dutch North Sea to bring that renewable hydrogen into Belgium and decarbonize their industrial cluster. Next slide, please. There are, of course, many regulatory items that I could address here, and some of them have already been addressed by Simone and Sunny. But I want to flag the most important one, and that is the fact that we need to scale up from small electrolyzers today to gigawatt scale by 2030. And at the same time, we're under pressure to bring down costs because governments want to accelerate the energy transition, but there's a cost with that. And that's, of course, crucial to keep that low. In that sense, we could say that electrolysis, renewable hydrogen production is in the same position as offshore wind was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, offshore wind really required visibility on the pipeline to mature a supply chain, to reduce risk for investors. And with that, the offshore wind sector got those commitments from government. They were able to reduce costs in the first place, reduce the need for subsidies, and in some places in Europe even become subsidy free. So therefore, we believe that you can also draw some similarities with the government approach for offshore wind. And yes, that will require public funding for a period of time. But if we want to make this part of the world a place where industries can invest in green manufacturing, that's what it takes. For the Netherlands, we see 3 steps to work towards the Dutch government's target of 3 to 4 gigawatts electrolysis by 2030. In that first phase, you'll need on-site projects, roughly around 100 megawatts. For example, on the site of Yara, which we are developing in our project Haddock. And then later on, you can work towards 500 megawatt projects, creating a regional market in the industrial clusters that we have in the Netherlands, but also in other countries. And then towards 2030, through the integration of these regional clusters, connection into a national backbone, you can start a national network with even cross-border connections from the Netherlands, obviously, into the industrial clusters in Germany and in Belgium. Sunny and Simone have already mentioned the delegated act, and I think I should also spend 2 seconds on that, because I want to flag that we need sufficient flexibility on the additionality principle, in particular to realize this first step. This first step, having 100 megawatt projects on site, on industrial sites, seems like a very small step if you look at what is presented by Ørsted, but also other companies, gigawatt scale projects. But this small step is a crucial one to get to the next. We can't just jump in one go to integrated projects like Sea2Land, where we take FID on the offshore wind farm and electrolyzer in the same 12 months. We'll get there at some point, but that will be rather towards the end of this decade. So I want to really underline that and hope that we can work with the Commission on making this principle workable and to ensure that we can start with the first step of scaling up renewable hydrogen production and then get to the next where we'll be able to create integrated projects where we link offshore wind, additional offshore wind to electrolyzers in industrial sites. As I said, there are many other regulatory must-win battles ahead of us. Think of grid tariffs, which have a major impact on the business case, but also think of the allocation method of offshore wind. Many countries in Northwestern Europe have a central auctioning method, but we are calling for a parallel approach, a parallel system in which companies through an open door can request an offshore wind site to ensure that they can link this to an electrolyzer, helping to decarbonize both the electricity and the industry sector. But perhaps Francois will get to that, the other regulatory must-win battles in the Q&A. So I'd like to leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel. Indeed, we have now roughly 17 minutes for an informed discussion now that we've heard all those positionings around the table. But maybe I can come back then first to, because I'm looking at the many questions that I have received through the chat, and I mean, we won't have the chance to cover all of them, but we will try to make sure we provide a follow-up in writing to most of them. But if I may say, coming back to the various questions that were asked and looking at the chat, we heard on the need to facilitate the access of renewable electricity for those industrial users and to make sure that we scale up the availability of renewable hydrogen. Maybe Henning, you can tell us a little bit more how the Commission is thinking in terms of facilitating the access of that electricity and avoid burdensome rules for accessing that electricity from the grid, for instance. We mentioned several times the notion of additionality. What basically is the Commission preparing for us?
I know these are key issues, which I can tell by the fact not only that they came up here today, but in my 3 or 4 weeks in the new job, I have been having people bringing them to my attention at least once a day. So I have understood that they are key, and not just me, but the people that work particularly in the Commission's DG Inner department on the forthcoming RED II revision. Know, of course, these issues. As I said, the discussions on this are currently ongoing internal, and we're not in a position to now in a public debate, share what the internal thinking on this is. But I can reassure you that these points are known. People, we are aware of them, and the issues that arise from renewable electricity costs. which, however, in recent renewable projects have come down already significantly. We obviously are aware of the issue of energy transmission costs and charges. So I can assure you that they are on the agenda. What I cannot do is say in which direction the internal discussions will be going. And if you were in my shoe, you would say the same.
Okay, thank you very much for already sharing a bit about it. Though you mentioned projects and you talked about the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. So maybe I can leverage that point to also bring a question that was raised from the audience, which is about the European hydrogen strategy that was very clear. Clean hydrogen means renewable hydrogen, and also sheds light on the sort of prioritization that we heard from the prioritization that is needed, which we heard from the various speakers here. Now, looking at the scope of the Alliance today, it seems that the definition for clean hydrogen is a bit broader than just focused on renewable hydrogen, and that various end-use sectors are included. Heating, blending is also in the scope, which goes a bit at odds with what was mentioned. And the question is very straight to you from the audience. How do you explain that paradox? Is the Clean Hydrogen Alliance less ambitious than the hydrogen strategy?
Look, I think they are fully in line, and I think we also would all agree that the focus clearly is on renewable hydrogen. That's clear from the hydrogen strategy. It's clear from all the discussions that we're having. The question is whether in a transition period where you may have hydrogen demand that may exceed the supply of renewable hydrogen, and in the effort to scale up the deployment of hydrogen, you, during a transition period, not also should consider other low emission hydrogen than renewable hydrogen. And I think that is the possibility that is foreseen also in the EU hydrogen strategy, clearly linked to this transition period, and not in any way questioning that, of course, the direction of travel and the focus is that of renewable hydrogen. So I think that's the concept and framework and logic that is given by the hydrogen strategy, and within which the Clean Hydrogen Alliance also works.
Thank you very much, Henning. It's interesting what you say, and you bring this notion of transition for certain periods that should allow for various types of hydrogen to be in the system when we know where the end goal is. When I turn to the speakers today, for instance, Wacker Chemie, it seems that it's very clear for them that the direction is a specific one to be taken, and that's renewable hydrogen from the start. Maybe, San, you could tell us a bit more. Why do you believe that renewable hydrogen will be the winning solution, and how we need to get there, but basically why you think you need to bet on that horse rather than others?
Yeah, thank you, Francois. I'm happy to elaborate a little bit on that. And as I said, this is now again from the perspective of an industrial producer, but also consumer of hydrogen, of course, because we're both. And as I said before, we really believe that in 2030, the market conditions will have improved a lot for renewable hydrogen. I mean, it's not just about the fact that we will have more renewable energy. We will also have a higher CO2 price. I mean, I think the ETS reached 50 euros in the last few days. And also in 2030, we will have higher efficiency and lower costs because of economies of scales. And most importantly, we will have a higher willingness by our customers to pay more for defossilized products. Now, under these market conditions, renewable hydrogen will be competitive with the fossil alternatives. But as I said, it's really the fact that we are not there yet. But the investment still has to happen today. But we know that in the next few years, renewable hydrogen will not be as competitive in terms of cost as the fossil alternatives. So this is really what's holding back private investment by industrial players today, like for Wacker. So hence, again, I mean, really the importance here of looking at the OPEX cost, as has been said by Simone and Joel as well. I mean, it's key for us to bring down the cost, really help us invest today so that we can get with our business model into 2030. Because, and this is maybe my last comment, I really firmly believe that we cannot leave this to the markets. And it's not because renewable hydrogen would not happen at all, but it's because it would happen too late. Time is of essence, both for reaching the 2030 climate goals and the hydrogen goals, but also for seizing this technology leadership in Europe, like you also mentioned, Francois. And I especially like what Joel said, that renewable hydrogen needs what offshore wind needed 10 years ago. And renewable hydrogen also needs what solar didn't get in Europe 10 years ago, and hence also to a large extent moved to China. So I really hope that we will not make the same mistake as we did 10 years ago with solar, and that we now let this technological advantage slip away by just not investing fast enough into this large-scale production.
Many thanks, Sunny. Very, very powerful message here, which sort of moves away from the paradigm of the sort of narrative we used to hear from industrial players, which has often been, let the market do. We will go towards renewable and let's the market do it itself. And now you're saying now we need solutions such as renewable hydrogen. This is not only about decarbonizing, this is also to secure competitiveness in the long term. And there is another emerging trends, which is developing the markets of tomorrow for less environmentally impactful products, which indeed consumers are more and more willing to pay for in view of mitigating the environmental footprint. So food for thoughts here. Thank you very much for those points. Simone, back to you here. We discussed a lot about the need for being efficient in Europe. And it seems from our debates and looking at the questions that I see from the audience that there is not so much of a disagreement around which sectors should be using renewable hydrogen in general. Maybe you could tell us a bit more what you think about those sectors that really need to be prioritized and why.
Thank you, Joel. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Ehrenstein also for, I was very happy to hear that the Commission already has in his radar some of the topics that we have mentioned about the cost of the OPEX, the cost of electricity, the level playing field needed on the energy prices, the topic of taxes and levies. And I wanted also to say that I share completely what Sunny just read, replying on your first question concerning what are the sectors where it's most efficient in our view. Let me say what we need to do with renewable hydrogen, first of all, is to make it competitive. It has to be competitive versus other forms of hydrogen. And since we have mentioned also blue hydrogen here, I think that blue hydrogen, we think that blue hydrogen is a solution which today in some cases could have a cost advantage compared to renewable hydrogen, but it's also very difficult to do. By the time that we will have blue hydrogen projects in place, this competitive advantage will have disappeared. So it's not something that will concretely be in place once we will have projects operating. So I would really recommend to focus the efforts where they are needed. This, of course, in order to make renewable hydrogen be competitive, it will take some time. It will take some time. We can decarbonize in the meantime those sectors where electrification can already provide the results. can provide the results in terms of CO2 emissions reduction, can provide results also in terms of technology leadership for Europe, also in the electricity sector. We have to make sure in the meantime that our investments in research, development, in upscaling of production for electrolyzers translate in technology leadership for Europe, as was already mentioned. And then we will be able, at this moment, once we have a competitive product, we will be able to decarbonize what has not been decarbonized in the meantime with direct electrification. I've mentioned this before. Of course, we see already that the first sector which we're looking at are the sectors that today already use hydrogen. Maybe not as energy, but as a feedstock, as Sani mentioned before, or those sectors which rely on fossil fuels and will then, in short, be able to convert to the use of hydrogen, renewable hydrogen especially. Those are the sectors that we look at. Of course,
maybe Simone,
yes.
Maybe Simone, I stop it there just because we are just approaching the end of this meeting, and sorry to interrupt. And I think you've made important points here. I just would like to take the last remaining minutes for also reverting back to the European Commission here, because there are more questions coming from the audience, and I think people are also appreciating the time of the Commission here with us for providing some more clarity on how basically are we going to move to the next step, which is deploying hydrogen projects on the ground. And there is an interesting question here coming up, which is about the established threshold in EU taxonomy. You've seen the delegated act adopted by the European Commission sets a threshold of 3 tons of CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions threshold for the production of hydrogen. And the question from the audience is whether this will be reflected in the pipeline of projects within the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. If you could give us a few hints at that.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. Thank you very much for the question. So indeed, this is the proposal that the Commission has come out with recently. We, of course, have to be seeing if this is also the final word. But indeed, given that this is our Commission proposal on the matter, this guides our actions by the Commission.
Thank you very much. Last question, maybe to close that panel debate, and I will then provide a very short concluding remark after that. Joel, so we've heard very different types of experience around the table here, many different projects, but that basically shows what is being done today by various types of players, from suppliers of energy to industrial players, so the value chain approach towards project development. Now, for those of us around the table and in the audience looking at replicating what you guys have been doing and the great job to deploy renewable hydrogen, what are the big obstacles that you've encountered in your project, and what can the European Commission do to maybe avoid those problems or obstacles for others that are looking into it?
Yes, thank you, Francois. I'll try to be brief so everyone can start grabbing lunch, or of course go to the next online meeting. Yeah, it again comes down. C2Land is a project with industrial off-takers, Dow Chemical, Yara, ArcelorMittal. These are companies operating in a global market. If I ask some of those companies, do you want renewable hydrogen for the price of fossil hydrogen? They would say, yes, I'd gladly have it. But if I ask them, do you want renewable hydrogen for the price of renewable hydrogen? They can say, they'll say, no, I can't afford that. And that's obviously what we need to work on. starting today, because we know where we need to get, but to get to that scale up and cost reduction, you need to start today. And again, I don't like to only ask for public money, because that's not the only thing. We as companies and as a value chain need to do our work as well, together with governments, together with policymakers. Companies, industrialists, they can of course try to create premium products, green steel, green fertilizers, but that's still a niche. There are not many off-takers that would like to pay more for steel if that's produced in a sustainable way. So that's just a niche for the moment. It will not help us to really scale up renewable hydrogen production. And we also need to work, as I mentioned, we need to work on making integrated projects like C2Land possible, because as I mentioned, this will help to reduce financing costs. An offshore wind farm, a fully merchant offshore wind farm without having any offtake is going to be very expensive. If you go to the bank or for your internal WACC, weighted average cost of capital, if you haven't got any certainty that someone will take all those volumes of green power, in an integrated project, again, your electrolyzer will give you a stable revenue stream, provide you with sort of a floor price. So we as the market need to make sure we can develop such integrated projects, but it will also need to be made possible by national governments. As I mentioned, a parallel approach to rolling out offshore wind and allocate those sites to electrolyzers. Then coming to what the Commission can do. Obviously, it starts with ambition, and I think we're in the right place there. We are expecting a Fit for 55 package, where a lot of stuff will happen, and we'll gladly talk further on that with legislators. One thing I should mention is also on infrastructure. On infrastructure, as I showed, C2Land wants to create a cross-border element, a pipeline running from the Netherlands into Belgium. And I think we talk about 10E, it's especially these kind of projects that will need some European funding. Because if you take in mind where we need to be in 2050, if you take in mind that it will be these cross-border pipelines that will be very hard to finance, that is where 10E can make a difference for long-term and for our long-term climate goals. So I call on European legislators to really look at where can 10E make a difference. And we believe it's in particular those projects with a long-term climate element and with a cross-border element. And then last but not least, obviously we're engaging in the EU IPCEI process, and we strongly believe that projects where the electron, the green electron generated on the North Sea, going all the way to steel that is produced in a more sustainable way, we strongly believe that such projects can really make a difference to make Europe that place where companies want to invest in sustainable production. So also there, again, not just a call to make public money available, but really to look at, to shape the regulation that can help to close the cost gap, so that when I ask again companies, for what price do you want renewable hydrogen, they can say yes, it will only require a tiny, smaller bit of public money in the next 10 to 15 years. So I think that's a challenge we need to work on as a market, but also as a public sector.
Thank you very much, Joël. These were very good words for concluding this meeting. I will just say a few words on top for the next minutes, and then we can all go have and grab food. Very quickly, we heard today that renewable hydrogen, mainly in industrial sectors, is definitely becoming a reality. It works, and some players are already going for it with the aim to secure prime mover advantages, and that is important to ensure their long-term competitiveness here and achieve deep decarbonisation for their sectors. So that's the first key thing that I will remember from this webinar. We also heard great examples of how we retrofit existing industrial sites. We heard a nice story, for instance, about retrofitting a coal plant to move towards renewable hydrogen. That is very important from my point of view when we talk about keeping jobs in Europe and help them transition towards the economy of the future. But what we also heard is the need for conditions to allow bridging these periods and make sure that we support renewable hydrogen and bridge the cost gap. So if we quickly conclude, what are the key messages that we heard? We heard very strong messages towards making a clear choice as part of the Fit for 55 package towards renewable hydrogen, not other types of hydrogen. There is also a clear call for helping accelerate and massively deploy additional renewable electricity generation, but also all types of electrolyzers. We saw projects from small to big scale today. Facilitating the availability of additional renewable electricity is also important. We heard from our speakers. Another dimension that was important, be efficient, focus on key sectors. Some sectors can benefit from the electrification. Other sectors are hard to electrify. These are the ones where renewable hydrogen should be used in priority. Finally, two last points. The point of bridging costs, we heard that from the three speakers. This is extremely important in this early phase, where support should help bridge the cost with fossil-based alternatives. They include support towards CapEx, OpEx, and we heard also in view of reducing the heavy taxation and levies on renewable electricity, which will be key to make the projects bankable for those end users and new sectors looking into using hydrogen in the future. And finally, again, on the efficiency point, there are concerns on blending hydrogen into the gas grid, which is not seen as the best way forward for risks of carbon locking stranded assets. These should be avoided, and we should also avoid suboptimal use of renewable hydrogen in sectors that have more efficient alternatives. With that, I'd like to conclude. I hope you've learned many valuable things during that webinar. The debate will continue in the coming months. We are expecting indeed, as you mentioned, Joël, the Fit for 55 package to come soon. See you soon. The recording of this webinar will be available in the coming days. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.